Hey, what's up? And welcome to episode 9 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview top DFS players about the mental health and lifestyle of playing high stakes fantasy sports. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, and in this episode, I chat with Michael Cohen, who you may know as TwoGun on FanDuel and DraftKings, at TwoGunFF on Twitter. Michael is exclusively an NFL DFS player, and he's the first person to ever win 3 DraftKings Millionaire Makers. The first one back in 2015, the most recent in 2019. I chatted with Michael about why he thinks it's important to focus on just one sport for DFS or one specific contest type, how he believes the edges have changed and evolved in NFL DFS, why he thinks it's important to have multiple streams of income if you want to be a high-level DFS player, and why playing within your bankroll is the most important factor in having the appropriate amount of risk tolerance for DFS tournaments. I'm telling you, we got tons of great guests lined up for future episodes, some that rarely enter the public spotlight, so make sure you do not miss an episode by subscribing, whether it's here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app. That way you get notified when new episodes are released. If you like this episode, if you like these interviews, give us a thumbs up, leave a 5-star rating and review in your podcast apps to help others find the show. On to today's guest. All right, here he is. Michael, what's up, man? How's it going?
Hey.
How's your Friday?
How's it going? It's going all right. How about yourself?
Doing great. Glad to have you on. And as you know, this is a podcast about mental health in DFS, the lifestyle of a DFS player. And the people will love to hear from someone who's won the DraftKings Millionaire Maker on 3 separate occasions. And I think that is absolutely the best place to start. So, Michael, you were the first DFS player to win 3 Millys, one in 2015, one in 2017, one in 2019. Each, by the way, of varying buy-in levels, which is extra impressive. So looking back now, how do you view that stretch? And in addition to that, where do you think you fit into the top DFS player conversation, if that's something you ever think about?
I feel like I tend to have like 2 good seasons, then like 1 off season. It seems like, and just those 3 seasons were just the ones where I happened to hit the millie. And then actually 2020 was a pretty good season, just didn't hit a millie maker. I just play a GPP only approach, so every now and then, and I'm always trying to win the first place. And I'm always attracted to the heavy buying contests. So it's just kind of, I guess I want to say it's part of my strategy to win the millie maker, but I tend to be attracted to the high payout contests. And for whatever reason, I've won the millie maker 3 times, but I've never even though I've gone to say the DraftKings championship 4 or 5 times and had a lot of entries a couple times, I've never won that. So I don't really know why. I seem to do better in the massive multiplayer fields, but that's just kind of how it's been. And in terms of the top players, I'm definitely feel like I hold my own as an NFL GPP player. I'm definitely not one of the better all-around players. I don't play the other sports, so and I'm sure there's other people that have done well at NFL GPPs, and maybe they've won more than me. But I think I hold my own there, especially since it's just I've been kind of I'm almost one of the more OG types that have been around for a while, and I've not every year have I had success, but I've kind of consistently had a lot of good years since 2013.
Yeah, and so do you think that because your Millys were 2015, 2017, 2019, and obviously you've had success since then as well, but do you attribute those massive wins to you having, let's say, an insanely sound process, or maybe being ahead of the curve in strategy, or just you're really good with your risk reward tolerance, or do you think that the fact that you've had 3 separate $1 million wins is extremely lucky? And yeah, sure, there's skill that plays a part in that, but someone out there was probably going to hit $3 million victories in the NFL, and it just so happened to be you. Which side do you fall on there?
I mean, there's definitely all that definitely is a little bit true. You always have to be lucky to win. There, in some of those years, I kind of was pressing, doing more buy-ins. I guess maybe because I was feeling it and I was just kind of having a good year. That definitely say 2017 that was the case. I remember the week I did my when the millie was the week I had the highest buy-ins in general for that season. In terms of process, my process has changed. It's always been kind of pivoting off of what I view the public is doing and trying to find an edge there. Generally some sort of a contrarian approach, especially in 2017 and 2019. So, I mean, I definitely think there was some guy that was going to win 3 millies first, and being an NFL GPP player and, playing a good size, obviously I had a good chance of being that person. but clearly I got lucky too to be able to, win those 3 contests.
Yeah, and as we all know, luck plays a huge part in all of it. And getting to the top prize, you can only get into the top 1%, and then you need the luck to get you into that first place finish. And we all need that. But clearly, you have a sound process, and clearly, you've had great success with your strategy. Now, let's talk about after you win these Millys. And again, looking back, have you ever had that much success in in any other area of your life? Not financially, but just as far as reaching these pinnacle accomplishments.
Not really, no. um, I mean, I've done fine. I'm pretty good at my job, my day job as a stock trader. Although, with that, you have stretches where you feel like you're great and stretches where you feel like you're an idiot too. And obviously, I have to say the most important thing, of course, is my family and my children. That's the most important thing. But in terms of being top, kind of doing an accomplishment that no one else has done, I guess, yeah, that's definitely the DFS, NFL DFS tournaments is definitely has to be up there for me. In terms of, but I'll be blunt and say, like, I'm not. I mean, I'm a competitive person, but I've never like, oh, I have to be the best. I have to be the best. I have to be number one. Like, I care about winning the tournaments and I care about the money. But like, I feel like, how do you rank some people of all time? Like, there's a lot of good NFL GPP players, and I don't really feel compelled to say like I'm better than this guy or that guy's better than me or this contest proves something. That's just not how I really think.
So what would you say motivates you the most then? Obviously, winning a lot of money is great, and obviously the competition is great, but how would you say those factors play into what really drives you to keep playing NFL DFS?
I mean, I think it's fun. I like watching football, and I like playing tournaments, and I like risking money and winning. So it's just really kind of the same thing as everybody else. It's not like oh, I don't care about the money. I just care about winning. Or I feel like my motivations are pretty much the same as most other people. I probably have a higher risk tolerance in terms of dollars at this point because I have a higher bankroll, I guess is a nice way to put it. And I'm pretty confident in my NFL DFS GPP skills at least. But I don't think I have really any different motivations than your average person playing NFL DFS.
So let's stick to that, the NFL focus, because you're pretty much exclusively an NFL DFS player. You just said that you don't really play the other sports. If you look at your
Mm-hmm.
if you look at your Roto Grinders profile, you're not ranked in any other sport. You don't have any recorded contests since the NFL playoffs ended. And in previous interviews, I don't know if it's the same now or if you realize this, but that you mentioned you were a donator in other sports, at least at some point. So why do you focus on NFL specifically?
Well, it's a combination of it's something I'm clearly the best at. After that season, the 2015 season, now that the 2015 Millie Maker happened at the end of the 2015 season because it was in the playoffs, but kind of that, around like March 2016 or whatever, I was kind of looking at my DFS wins and losses, and it was pretty much all NFL. Like I was up a little bit at like basketball and baseball at the time. So I just kind of was like, why am I spending so much time on these other things? And I was about to start a new job, so I just was like, and I have a wife, and I was going to have kids, and I just there's a time issue. I just don't have time to play baseball and basketball and play at an elite level. So I just decided all I'm going to do is NFL DFS. And if you notice for say FTN, I only write about NFL DFS GPPs. I don't really even talk about anything else. I just really specialize on the one thing that I've been good at consistently. Before I used to play baseball and basketball like 2013, 2014 when the games were really easy and soft. But since then, I'm like, well, these games are gone harder and I have less time. It's just kind of a no-brainer for me. I just have to kind of cut bait and focus on what I'm good at.
Yeah, so you mentioned FTN and you write for FTN, and obviously FTN has a lot of great writers and DFS players. So how do you have the discipline to keep not playing those other sports when you go on Twitter and you see screenshots or you see the lobby and you see $1 million prize pools up in other sports? What really allows you to have that discipline not to dip your toes back into the water of those other sports?
I kind of think, to be honest, it's easier if you're kind of all in or all out in a certain sport. If you're like, oh, I'll play some days or I'll play other days, like it's kind of like you're in, you're just not really going to do it that well. And I really just don't have time to do all in for basketball or baseball. So it's pretty easy for me to not care. if anything, it bothers me more in NFL when I'm having a bad season. I see everyone else winning, then I'm like, I wish next week I'm gonna get them. I just the type of person where if I'm not into it, I'm just not into it.
That totally makes sense though. And you mentioned your job, right? So you started this new job in 2016 or so, where you're a trader now. And again, this was after your first Millie. You have another Millie win, two more Millie wins actually while you're doing this. What were you doing before you were trading? And was there ever any thoughts or conversations about maybe I just play NFL DFS full time because I'm making so much money doing it? Or were you always the type of person that always had to have a job too?
I was always the type of person that had the mentality that I had to do something else too. I never really thought I would just be an NFL or just a DFS player for the rest of my life. I played poker back in the day, online poker, so I kind of saw how this whole thing went. Where it was really easy to win at first, and the games get harder, and then you make less money, and then it just gets harder and harder. So I was like, I don't really want to put my life where I'm just so focused on that one thing. For a while, I worked at like a fantasy sports startup, Sports TradeX, that it ended up not going anywhere. So after that folded, and I was just an NFL or I was just a DFS player for a little bit. I'm like, but I need to find something else. I don't want to just put my whole focus on DFS for the rest of my life, because if I ever want to pivot to something else, it's harder to do that. So I decided to, hit up a friend that got me into stock trading and got me a job for a hedge fund. It's been a great experience. And I think it helps because, they're not correlated at all. Like my DFS performance is not correlated with how I'm trading. So it takes less pressure off me. If I'm having a DFS downswing, it's kind of like, well, whatever. I'm kicking ass trading. So whatever.
Did you have any finance background or education to get into the job you have now?
No, I mean, I graduated college with an economics degree, but it's not helpful at all for trading. That's not why I got my job. DFS was somewhat helpful. Learning risk reward and understanding where you might have an edge and stuff like that. It's kind of helpful in all forms of gambling and trying to have an advantage when you're placing a bet per se.
All right, so you mentioned that the game gets harder and harder, whether it's poker, whether it's DFS. So let's talk about your process and your evaluation a little bit. And since you mostly just play NFL, that means you have a long off season in theory to review your processes and prepare for the upcoming season. How often do you review and evaluate your DFS process in season versus out of season?
Out of season, I just like completely forget about it, to be honest. Like I'm just like, oh, I'm done. Time to take a mental break. In season, I will kind of evaluate it, each week. I'm kind of, seeing what's winning, what's not winning, what I'm doing, how people are kind of constructing their lineups, what the trends seem to be. So feel if I need to tweak anything. There has been like not so much lately, but it's like the 2016 season was I'm gonna say it was my worst season from a financial basis, but it was my worst season in the sense that like I felt like, oh, I might not be able to win at this thing anymore. Like, so going into the 2017 season, I felt like I needed to do something a little bit different. Although I didn't really do a whole lot of things different, I just did better. So it just kind of goes to show you that sometimes just a downswing will mess with your mind a little bit.
Yeah, it totally does. And you mentioned that 2017 year. How often do you actually doubt your process and results as the game continues to change each year?
Um, I don't, anytime I have a losing stretch, I start to think, oh, am I doing something wrong? But I think the thing about NFL DFS is such a small sample size that it's hard to really tell that you're screwing up consistently until it's a few years of losing. So I haven't really had that like, oh man, I'm doing something completely wrong. I totally need to change, or I can't win at this anymore. But the thing about my process is I kind of take advantage of that NFL is so small too, and the sample size is so too. So when people start when the public and the sharps kind of gravitate to certain strategies that really just work well because of kind of variance, like it just so happens that it's working because of the small sample size, and I take the opposite out of that. That's generally been an approach that kind of works because I kind of shift to where the ways I'm pivoting against the public.
And that's smart though, because even though the game changes, the edges change too, but there still always are going to be edges. You just have to find them. And so on that note, especially now compared to back when you first started, there's information publicly available tools and projections that are so much more widely available than they were when you first started. Do you think that helps in a way because the public and the sharps are able to get onto the same plays at a greater frequency than they were back in the day? And then on that note, how would you quantify your edge now compared to those Millie years?
Well, so the good thing about NFL is that it's a high variance sport, and just looking at projections and just isn't a great process. So the fact that everyone's like looking at the same stuff and almost everyone eventually becomes brainwashed, it kind of like gives you a way to pivot against the public compared to say basketball and baseball, where I never was really able, like a lot of the like sports that are more pure projection, like I haven't ever found a way to basically pivot against that. Like sometimes the projections are just the way to go. I don't know, but I've never been able to really formulate a strategy kind of using that information, because winning at baseball in say 2013 is just not the way to win at baseball in 2022. It's just not the same. But with NFL, at least for me, like I understand that everyone looks at all these, all the other sites, and I understand these things, and there's just ways that you can kind of think a little bit of ahead of that, and we'll see if that still works. But I feel like since my edge has been, I'll never say it's been consistent because I've had losing years and I've had winning years, but since 2013 I seem to have two winning years and then a losing year or something like that. Like until that really that kind of pattern changes drastically, it seems to be that what I'm doing is working. And in the later years is kind of when I've gone with more of a contrarian approach. In say 2013, 2014, I just played, straight up points per dollar like everyone else did, and that was good enough because no one really knew what they were doing. But call it 2015 to 2021, I kind of do my approach that I kind of talk about on FTN. And in say 20, just looking at the past 2 years, 2020 was a really good year, even though I didn't win a million. And 2019 was a good year and I won a million. And then the 2021, I actually had a small losing year. So we'll see what happens in 2022, right?
Yeah, so are you expecting a winning year or a losing year? Because if you're expecting a winning year, then maybe we should stay out of your high stakes contest and let you get those, and we'll work on some other
I mean, I'm
contests.
hoping I seem to have a couple of good years and a down year. So I had my down year. So hopefully I got 2 years ahead of me. We'll see. But I don't ever want to count my chickens before they hatch.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about the losing years and the lows a little bit. And I think if you look at your contest selection, you play a lot of high stakes contests. You play primarily tournaments, which in combination is a recipe for wild financial swings in any fantasy sport. So you mentioned you did have a losing year. So Michael, in as much or as little detail as you would be willing to describe, what's the worst downswing you've ever had in your DFS career? And that can be either from a length of time perspective or an actual dollar amount perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I guess it's kind of different. Like, I feel like my biggest downswing from a mental standpoint was probably around 2016 or so. It was more of the fact that I just never had any big wins that season that really got to me. And I took my buy-ins, my weekly buy-ins down to like 8 grand at one point, or 5 to 8 grand. Whereas say nowadays they're probably around 50 grand for a Sunday. So the amount I ended up losing in that streak was smaller, probably maybe like 100 to 200 grand. I don't know, probably 200 grand. I don't exactly remember, but it was just more that I didn't feel the confidence to beat the public the way I had in previous years. And I was thinking maybe it got to my head. I was like, well, maybe my 2014 and 2015 success isn't going to be replicated anymore since everyone's already gone in and sees all the other publicly available information. So kind of like in 2017, once I had that good season, I kind of got my mojo back. And even though 2018 was kind of a nothing year, it didn't really get to my head. And nowadays, my weekly swings are higher when I'm losing, just because I'm doing $50,000 a week buy-ins instead of doing like $8,000 to $10,000 a week buy-ins like I was doing in 2016. So my downswing is a little bit more financially, but like it doesn't really bother me as much because I do have another job. I just have a better bankroll situation in general. So as long as I'm kind of consistently still having some wins and feel like my process is still sound, doesn't really bother me.
Yeah, so it sounds like, at least at this point, and to the extent that any human can be comfortable with financial losses of that magnitude, it sounds like you're pretty comfortable, or at least okay enough with the swings and understand them. And do you think that you got to this point because of the experience that you had? Is it because you do have this other job and there's not as much pressure on this as your sole source of income? All those factors combined, what do you think lead you to be? And maybe I'm misreading, and maybe you don't feel like you're emotionally equipped to handle financial swings. But in regarding to handling them, how do you think those factors play a part?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that I'm able to handle these swings in DFS allows me to do my contrarian approach for a large amount of money that most people probably aren't comfortable with. So it's kind of an advantage, the fact that I do have another job and I do have a bankroll, because the old saying of scared money doesn't make money. Like, I'm not scared because like what I lose on a Sunday is less than what I'll make or lose on my regular line of work. So it's just kind of like you have to understand the grand schemes of money swishing around the world. The DFS community is kind of like single A baseball, whereas like the stock market and the financial community is like the major leagues, right? So like I might be a big hitter in single A baseball, even though I'm kind of a little pissant in the major leagues. The major leagues are still the major leagues, like that's where you can really make some money, or you can get hurt if you're an idiot. So kind of like when I go play in single A, I'm like, yeah, it's in single A, it's all good. I know this. I know this place, man. I've got my buddies here. It's just kind of like chill.
Right. So for those that are listening that are aspiring to get to a high level in DFS, and maybe they'll never make it to the major leagues in the finance world, but to me, at least I think they can take away, and maybe I think you'll agree with this, is that the biggest factor in handling financial swings with your DFS bankroll is having a grip on your bankroll and not playing above your bankroll level.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you need to be confident in your ability, but you need to also be correct about your ability. You can't like think I'm the best DFS. I'm so amazing, and then you just end up losing and wasting your time. But yes, you can't play above your bankroll, but you also need to play enough of a size if you're doing this like for a serious amount of time, or like if you're trying to do serious amount, like you have to play enough to where it matters. But like I said, there's also the scared money doesn't make money. You definitely can't play scared. So in general, I'm a big proponent of have some other source of income. Like, don't just have DFS be your sole source of income, because you're always going to be scared money. I don't see how you're not. And it's okay if like there's some people that are DFS players and they're also touts. I mean, technically I am one of those, but there's some people that are just DFS players and just touts. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because to be a good DFS player, you do need to have another side of income. So you're not going crazy in the head. And that's why I also think that in general, it's better if you can focus on just one sport, or not try to do everything, because it's hard to do everything. It's just hard to have that time to have another source of income and do all sports, do everything. Like, I just don't see how you can do it. So unless you're just got a shit ton of money and you just don't really give a shit, and you can just lose 1 or 2 million and you'd be like, whatever. I just think in general you kind of have to kind of integrate DFS into part of your general financial picture. I don't know how to put it.
No, that makes a ton of sense, and it definitely eases the decision-making process when you do have another source of income. Even if DFS is your full-time income or your primary income, having some other sources certainly helps ease the burden, that's for sure. So let's talk about the lifestyle a little bit. So you're not a full-time DFS pro, but you play pretty seriously. You have a full-time job, and your day job is similar from a lifestyle and unhealthy perspective as DFS is, where you're sitting a lot, you're looking at a device like a million hours a day, and then during NFL season, Michael, you're watching games for 10 to 12 hours at a time. So do you do anything to help combat that sedentary lifestyle? Do you physical exercise, meditation? What do you do to try to improve that lifestyle?
I probably should exercise more, but I don't. I mean, I do a little bit. I'm trying to do more, but I don't know. It just doesn't really bother me. They can't really hurt me that much anymore, from a mental standpoint. Like, I care about winning, and especially since I work for a fund and it's not my money, I have to take it very seriously, and I have to make sure it's not just like my proportion. I need to make sure I don't take risks or do anything stupid to anger my bosses. But in terms of say DFS, like it's almost like you just can't hurt me anymore. I don't know how else to put it. I'm immune to the shit.
Yeah, that's when you reach the level of I no longer feel emotions. That's when you know you've reached the pinnacle of DFS. So you're married, you have children. How does your DFS playing affect family time during the NFL season?
Oh, my wife fucking hates it. She hates the NFL. She's like, oh god, football's about to start. She doesn't give a shit if I win $1 million. Like, but so I'm basically just make sure I spend as much time as possible during the week and on Saturdays, and I get my Sundays. And quite frankly, if my lineups look like they're shit, I don't watch the afternoon games. I just I try to I'll watch the first set of games, and if my stuff is dead or I'm just like, whatever. What's the point? I'll just go spend time with the family. So I don't put a whole lot of stock in watching games as a way to learn or anything like that. It just doesn't really mean anything. I think if anything, if you put too much into what you saw, like, oh, I saw this, thing, then I think you tend to put too much stock into some idea you have, and it doesn't really necessarily help your, DFS ability. So I try to really ration my time well on the weekends during football season to not piss off my wife too much.
So speaking of her, what are those conversations like with her? The DFS financial conversations. If she doesn't give a shit about you winning $1 million, does she give a shit about you losing $1 million? Or like, what are those conversations like? How involved is she in your DFS play and your results?
Well, that's the upside of all this is that she just doesn't want to know. So yeah, it just doesn't really matter.
I guess a lot of people would be pretty okay with that situation then. So,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's kind of the best scenario. I mean, every couple, works things out different ways. Like some couples love to watch the games together. Like my wife is just not into sports. Unless I'm like winning $1 million, she wants to like be there to like be part of the moment. But the upside is she's not going to be like, oh, why did you use that player? Like she never like second guess me or second guess any of the decisions I do. And I appreciate that because it's not like I never second guessed her decisions on what she's good at. So I kind of think for us, it works real well where she just trusts me to do my thing, and I have to reciprocate by making sure I'm there for the family, and I'm not just completely abandoning them during football season.
yeah, and that's the biggest thing, having that trust in your partner. It sounds like you're lucky enough to have that. So congrats there. What do your non-gambling friends and family think of your DFS play?
They just think they just think I'm some DFS, guru or whatever. But I just been bending and stuff since poker, so it's just kind of who I am. It's kind of my identity at this point. Like I don't think I mentioned this to you, but like my wife and I recently bought 12 acres in a private street. And we're gonna build a house on it, and since I own the street, I was able to change the name of the street and I changed it to TwoGun Way. Like I could have changed it to say like our family name or some shit like that, but I'm like, no, no, no.
Nah, dude,
This is
that's some major league shit
this is
right
all
there.
about TwoGun. It's my identity at this point. I kind of go all in on the TwoGun thing. So no matter what it is, I don't know.
And your wife, just to make sure your wife doesn't draw the line at naming the street that she's going to live on as your fantasy username. She's cool with that too, right?
Yeah, she's cool with it. Maybe I just kind of blindsided her with it to where she couldn't fight back in time. But we're gonna have to have the TwoGun logo, right? But we're gonna put our my last name's Cohen, so I'm gonna have like a C in there, so the family's all part of the TwoGun logo and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, plus TwoGun Way is way cooler than like Cohen Street. Like there's
It's
billions
infinitely
of
cool.
Cohens out there.
Yeah, dude, that's way cool. That's a boss move.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so Michael, I know you got some family time here coming up, so I'll let you get out of here. Just let's get to the final portion of some final advice. So, what do you think is the most important skill to have in being a top DFS player?
Um, maybe it's because I'm talking my book here because I'm a specialist, but I think being a specialist at something is the way to go at this point, especially since DFS is so mature as a thing. Like, be really good at like a sport or GPPs. Don't like try to be good at like. Don't just be like I'm gonna have action every single day of the year. Just don't be the guy that's like doing $50 to $100 of entries every single day. Not really good at anything. Like, really focus on one thing and try to be top at that one thing. I think that's the way to go in a kind of a mature hobby like DFS.
And I think you hear a lot of top players. If you listen to other episodes here, you hear a lot of other players say that as well. So I think it's really smart advice. And what would you want to tell someone who would like to become either a DFS pro or a high volume DFS player here in 2022?
Well, I would discourage just doing DFS as your only thing, because even I don't do that. I'm probably one of the most winningest players, ever, especially when you factor in over 8, 9 years. Like, whereas a lot of guys may have won like a lot in like 2 years and then they didn't do shit. I've kind of won a lot, kind of consistently over years, but even I focus on doing something else in my life. So I would say if you want to like really focus on DFS, I would say, have some other stream of income or some other passion, or you can get involved in the industry. There's another way to do it, and then just focus on one sport, and that way you can kind of justify the time you spend on it and the money you spend on it. I think that's really the way to go at this point.
Sounds good. You heard it there from TwoGun. So, Michael, I'll let you get out of here. Appreciate your time. And I'll give you the floor if you have anything we haven't talked about or anything you want to promote.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, I got to promote FTN. If you, see my writings, see all the other smart guys at FTN, I'll always be on there during, NFL season with my weekly GPP articles and stuff like that. So thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it, Michael. And thanks to everyone out there for listening.